Well, now to the election in Poland. The votes are in. We now know the results. So will Poland dramatically change? Are we going to see a major shift? Perhaps a huge move away from NATO support, a dramatic change in Poland, or more of the same? Mike Krupa is journalist in Warsaw, Poland. Fantastic friend of the show. We're glad to have Mike back. He's the host of Votum TV there in Poland. Mike, so any big surprises for you or sort of more of the same from what we saw? Can you walk us through what exactly happened?
Well, hello, Clayton. Hello, everyone. Once again, it wasn't a surprise for me. I predicted from some time now that Law and Justice, the ruling party thus far, would win the elections, but they wouldn't get a majority. So the fundamental question everybody was asking, even last week, was who with whom Law and Justice is going to have to form a coalition. Now, most of the observers and analysts were saying that they would most likely form a coalition with the party that is to the right of them. That is a Confederation Party. I spoke about it a few times on your show. However, it turns out that while expectations were very high for Confederation, some were even estimating back in the spring that they would get about 15% of the vote. It turns out they got just over 7% of the vote, which gives them about 18 MPs right now in the current parliament instead of the projected originally 50 to 60 MPs. So that's a big blow to Confederation. In order to have a majority in the Polish parliament, you have to have 231 MPs. Peace does not have, Law and Justice does not have that on its own. So what's going to happen now is the three next parties, which are the three main opposition parties, which is the Civic Platform, led by Donald Tusk. Then we have the so-called Third Way, which is basically a sort of conglomerate of these liberal lights and the so-called Peasant Party, so basically a party of farmers, and the hard left, the woke left party, which is called the Left Party basically in Poland. They will most likely be forming a coalition, and they will most likely be governing with Tusk as head of government, as prime minister. So no big surprises for me. The only, I guess, surprise for me was I actually did expect Confederation to come out slightly higher. I thought they would get about 9% of the vote. They got just over 7%, as I said. So yeah, that's a loss for Law and Justice. It's a loss for Confederation, generally for the right wing in Poland. And we are expected to have a left liberal, very pro woke and very pro EU coalition coming up.
Were you surprised by that? I mean, it seemed like there, from the outside, maybe there was enormous pushback from sort of woke politics, this alignment with the European Union on a number of different issues, the alignment with NATO, of course, the war in Ukraine. Seems striking here.
The problem with the new coalition is that they are just as pro-Ukraine and pro-NATO as Law and Justice, except Law and Justice was a little bit too fanatical. So the current coalition will be slightly less fanatical, but in terms of the general course of the sort of Atlanticist institutions, NATO and the European Union, they're going to toe the line. Except the only thing that might change is they're not going to be asking, for a fight with Russia, maybe as much as Law and Justice did. As a matter of fact, just before we came on, I was actually looking at the government record from the previous prime ministership of Donald Tusk, which was in the years 2007, about 2015. And Tusk, on many occasions, actually articulated a rational policy towards Russia, at least not a policy of let's be the first ones, let's not be the tip of the spear in fighting Russia, which the Law and Justice government obviously was not. They were asking for a fight, basically. And the only reason why in the last couple of weeks they changed their tune regarding Ukraine, especially when it comes to the import of Ukrainian grain and issues pertaining to Ukrainian immigrants, was because they saw that Confederation, which is the party to the right of them, was actually gaining on this issue, talking about the refugee flow and talking about, sending all our military equipment to Ukraine and losing the war in essence. So there was a lot of people that were fed up. Obviously, the turnout, which is interesting, was over 70%. So that's a record after 1989 for Poland. But I think a lot of people were just fed up with 2 terms of the Law and Justice government, because at some point they really became, enamored with power, and they just didn't care what anybody said about them. They thought they were really going to govern for a 3rd term, and that just made them very arrogant. And a lot of people maybe didn't look so much at the policy specifics as just get them the hell out of there, and we want to see new faces in government. And I think a lot of it was based basically on emotion and not on sound, rational policy analysis.
What do you think this means for the Ukrainian refugees in Poland? Any change there on that policy? Because
I
what is
think
the current number, too? We had over close to 3 million Ukrainian refugees that were staying there.
the ones that came here and are still here after the ones that came after February 24th, 2022, it's estimated about 2 million. So if you take that 2 million plus the 2 million around that were already here before the war, that's going to create about 4 million. I think with the amount of the ones that aren't declared, the ones that are here illegally, you're probably going closer to about 5 million. So I don't think their status quo will change. Sadly, I think what's going to happen right now is we're going to be seeing this policy push for larger multiculturalism in Poland. And I wouldn't be surprised if in light of this, and within a decade's time, we're going to have a Ukrainian minority party in the Polish parliament. And that's when you're going to know that things are really gone down the drain for Poland. But it's interesting because peace, the Law and Justice, we call it Peace in Poland, they were officially conservative, even though they had the most liberal immigration policy in all of the EU. During their time, more non-EU people came into the EU, to Poland specifically, than in any other European country. And I'm talking about obviously legal immigrants. So despite the rhetoric, the borders were open. The forming coalition is not going to change that, sadly. But I think that will only strengthen the opposition sort of on the streets and possibly give new motivation for anti-immigrationist parties, somewhat like the Confederation, to make new gains in next year's local elections and the elections to the European Union, which are scheduled for June.
Last year, we saw Polish citizens lined up with their cars getting coal from power plants that were not even set up to really hand out coal to individual citizens, like taking your hatchback and just filling up the trunk with chunks of coal to try to drive home with. We now know, of course, what's happening in the Middle East, and of course, the push towards clean energy in Poland. This was a big push on the part of Poland. We could see an energy crisis facing Europe and facing Poland into this winter, given what's happened with the Middle East. So where do the Polish people sit right now on energy supplies, fossil fuels? Can you talk a little bit about what you guys expect to see there as we head into the colder months?
The problem with the coalition that's coming in right now is they're even more green than the other party that just lost the election. Now, whereas Law and Justice, they pretended to be very, anti-woke, in the climate agenda and so on and so on. But in terms of signing all the relevant documents in the European Union pertaining to fighting emissions and all that stuff, they signed everything. But then they came back and said, the European Union forced us. Well, the coalition that's coming in right now, they're not going to say that because they're going to willingly sign up to everything of the climate agenda that the EU pushes. So, electric cars and all that stuff and phasing out of coal. So it's obviously not going to happen from day to day, and there will be a lot of pushback. But if basically the government that's coming in right now is about as crazy on the climate change issue as the Greens in Germany, especially the left party, which is going to be forming most likely as coalition. So I think they're going to be...
That turned out really well for Germany, by the way.
Yeah, of course. But, as I said, I'm pretty sure that'll generate a lot of pushback. And I think Tusk is even, enough of a realist to know that, even if you implement these globalist policies, you have to implement them in phases and incrementally, whereas the left is probably going to be pushing very much to implement them quickly. That way you can't, reverse anything once they lose power, which they surely will. As I said, we talked about this before we went on. I think including the climate agenda and the agenda in foreign policy and the woke agenda that they will surely try to impose on Polish society in the upcoming years and months. I don't think this coalition is going to last too long. I think there's too many differences and too many personal differences between them. So I'm giving them about 18 months, you heard it here for the first time, before this coalition collapsed. And we're probably going to have early elections in Poland. But one way or another, I'm giving them 18 months. Yes.
All right, we'll hold you to that. We'll keep a little countdown timer.
18 months before you're going to have a civil war in the coalition, because despite the fact that they're mainly aligned on a lot of issues pertaining to social policy and foreign policy, but because there's so much of the cake to give around right now, once you throw out the old elite, that's going to generate a lot of conflict. So who's going to go into, state-owned companies? Who's going to go into state-owned television? Who's going to take over the ministries? Once you're dividing a good cake, everybody wants the bigger piece. So I think that, in essence, and not so much policy issues, is going to be generating the conflicts that eventually are going to lead to the, collapse of the coalition.
I'll get you out of here on this, Mike. Over the past few days, since the outbreak of war in Israel, we've against the 17 factions there on the Palestinian side. Everyone wants to paint this just as Hamas, but it's very important to point out this basically 17 different factions there. There's been a lot of memes around on the internet about Poland. As you see London, you see all of these protests, you see France. There's been a lot of memes floating around about Poland, how you don't see this in Poland. Can you talk about that? Can you address why you would have 2 million Ukrainian refugees, but you don't see the type of perhaps protests and crisis that you're seeing in London and France and other EU countries right now?
Well, I've seen the memes on Twitter. I've seen the ones, oh, look, and this is Poland, no Hamas demonstrations, no Palestine organizations, no pro-Palestine demonstrations. Well, first of all, there was a pro-Palestine demonstration in Krakow. It wasn't as large as the one in London and in other countries, and it wasn't so maybe Muslim up front, but it did take place. They had guys walking around, with the Arafat colors and the Palestinian flag. So there was a demonstration in Krakow, which all those, outlets didn't report on. And the second thing is, okay, we might not have a Muslim problem in Poland, but we sure as hell have a Ukrainian problem in Poland. And the same places that are shown in Krakow right now, lacking in Muslim demonstrations or pro-Palestine demonstrations, almost every single day since last year, there was a permanent Ukrainian presidents beside the statue of Adam Mickiewicz in Krakow Square. Now, Adam Mickiewicz is obviously a famous Polish poet and playwright. And beside his statue, you basically have this gathering of Ukrainians standing with flags, screaming support Azov, support Ukraine. And that was basically on a permanent basis. So after a while, a couple of Polish people got angry. Patriots started protesting against his football hooligans and so on and so on. So I don't know if it's still there, but the Ukrainians are the ones protesting in Poland and making their presence known. So, when I saw the meme for the first time, they say, oh, look, no Hamas demonstrations in Poland. I'm like, yeah, but you have Azov demonstrations in Poland, which pretty much to me amounts to the same thing. So I don't care. The best thing would be to do not to have one or the other, right? So I think it's basically a meme to sort of, it was, I called Jack Posobiec out on this on Twitter. I said, Jack, stop shilling for peace, for the law and justice government. I mean, they're just as pro-immigrant and pro-open borders just to the east, not to the south, because bringing in Muslims on a huge number basis like the Ukrainians will still look bad in the media right now in Poland. It might change with time, but Ukrainians, hey, what the hell? At least they're white, right? And they speak a similar language, but they're as detrimental to our culture, if not more, and to our economy as the masses that would come from the South. So, it's just, as I said, it was just poor shilling for the ruling party. And I understand where they're coming from, a lot of these people.
Well, thank you for shining a light on this and telling us the truth here. It's very easy for these memes to travel on the internet very quick, and Jack wants to tweet that kind of stuff, and it makes it seem like that's the truth. But thank you for sharing the actual truth with us here on the show. Mike Krupa, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's been a busy few days with the election there. We appreciate you bringing your insights on what this means for the government going forward. And you heard it here, the Polish government, 18 months. 18 months. That's it. That's all they've got left. We'll see a new government, I guess, in 18 months. Mike, great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Have a good one. God willing. Godspeed.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.